Have you ever stopped to think about where our most basic ideas come from? Things like logic, democracy, even science? Well, it turns out a huge chunk of our modern world was first imagined over 2,000 years ago in one city by just a handful of incredible thinkers. So let's dive in and see how their story basically became our story.
Our whole journey starts with a real head-scratcher. What you're looking at is the death of Socrates, who was sentenced to die by the very democracy he called home. So how on earth could Athens, right in the middle of its golden age, this beacon of civilization, turn on its most famous philosopher? That question, that's the key to unlocking everything that comes next.
So who exactly was this guy, Socrates? Well, he was one of the most famous figures in Athens during its absolute cultural peak. But he wasn't a politician or a general. He was a philosopher, a guy who just walked around the city streets asking questions. They called him the city's gadfly because he was always buzzing around, prodding and challenging everyone, from the most powerful people to the average citizen. Now here's what's so fascinating. Socrates never wrote a single word down, not one. Everything, and I mean everything, we know about him and his ideas comes to us secondhand. Most of it comes from the writings of his most brilliant student, a man named Plato. And that relationship, it would literally change the course of history.
This was his signature move, what we call the Socratic method. The whole point wasn't about him having all the answers. No, it was about proving what wasn't true by asking question after question. You'd start a conversation, he'd ask you a bunch of questions, find the contradictions in your logic, and together you'd chip away at the weak ideas. It's a search for truth, but you start by getting rid of all the nonsense.
And this really gets to the heart of his entire philosophy. It all began with this radical idea of humility. You start by admitting you know nothing. He taught that life wasn't about chasing money or power. The real goal, the whole point, was this constant, lifelong journey of self-examination, of truly knowing yourself. For him, virtue was the only thing worth having.
But, constantly questioning authority, that came with a price. The powerful folks in Athens accused him of corrupting the city's young people and not respecting the gods. He was put on trial and ultimately sentenced to die by drinking a poison called Hemlock. And get this, for a strange twist, some of the jury members who actually thought he was innocent at first ended up voting for the death penalty anyway in the final round.
You can just imagine, for his student Plato, this was a devastating trauma. He watched the state execute the man he believed was the wisest and most just person alive. So Plato basically dedicated the rest of his life to answering one single question. How do we build a society where something this terrible can never, ever happen again?
And his conclusion? It was pretty radical. He turned completely against Athenian democracy. From his point of view, any system that could be manipulated into killing its best citizen was just fundamentally broken. The death of his teacher was all the proof he needed that you just couldn't trust the masses with ultimate power.
So, he came up with a whole new blueprint. His ideal society wouldn't be ruled by public opinion, but by these highly educated philosopher kings. And this all stemmed from his core belief in something called the world of forms, this idea that the world we see and touch is just a flickering shadow of a higher, perfect reality. And only true philosophers, he argued, could see those perfect forms. To actually create these future leaders, he founded the world's first real university, the Academy, a place designed to forge minds capable of ruling with true wisdom.
But not everyone was buying into Plato's vision of a higher reality. In fact, his most brilliant student at the Academy would challenge these very ideas and set Western thought on a totally different path. And that was Aristotle. If Plato's eyes were always looking up at the heavens, at those ideal forms, Aristotle's were planted firmly on the ground, on the world he could actually see and study.
And you can really see the difference between them here. Plato was the great idealist, but Aristotle, he was the ultimate materialist. He was a biologist, a physicist, a collector of facts. He believed you found truth by observing, collecting data, and categorizing the world around you. He didn't just come up with a system of logic, he created the actual rule book for how to make a reasoned argument. His work laid the groundwork for, almost everything, which is why we call him the father of European thought.
And just like his teacher, Aristotle started his own school, the Lyceum. But his influence went way beyond that. He became the personal tutor to a young prince who would grow up to conquer most of the known world, Alexander the Great. I mean, can you just imagine the kinds of conversations those two must have had?
Now, it's so important to remember that this intellectual firestorm between these giants of philosophy wasn't happening in a vacuum, not at all. The entire city of Athens was just on fire with creative genius.
This was a true golden age, a mind-blowing explosion of art and culture that went far beyond philosophy. I mean, just look at this lineup. It is an all-star team of the ancient world. You've got the great playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, putting on plays that we are still performing today. You've got the birth of history itself with Herodotus and the sharp, almost journalistic analysis of Thucydides. Not to mention incredible public speakers and sculptors whose work literally defined classical beauty. The whole civilization was just firing on all cylinders.
So, why does any of this from so long ago matter to us now? Because these ideas, they never really disappeared. They are the bedrock of our world. Their echoes have been bouncing down through the centuries, shaping our history the entire time.
Let me give you one beautiful example. Music. The ancient Greeks thought music was, quite literally, magical. They saw it as this system of pitch and rhythm ruled by the exact same mathematical laws as the planets, and they believed it had the direct power to change a person's character, their very soul. They called this the doctrine of ethos.
And here is the crucial connection. Fast forward hundreds of years to the 15th and 16th centuries. It was the rediscovery of these ancient Greek texts, their philosophy, their art, their ideas about music, that directly sparked the Renaissance. It was a rebirth of these classical ideas that pulled Europe out of the Middle Ages and right into the modern world.
And that brings us right back to where we started, with Socrates. He left us with a powerful tool, the idea that real wisdom, real knowledge, starts with humility. So I'll leave you with this to think about. If knowledge truly begins with admitting you know nothing, what are you ready to question?